Well, hello, hello.
Hello, hello, and happy Pride
Happy
season.
Pride season. As you can see, Jason and I are in bright colors today in honor of Pride Month.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So, welcome to episode 34, where we're looking at owning your story without apology, where we're going to move from shame to self and the neuroscience and heart of living out loud. And I'm very excited about today's conversation, Jason, for lots of reasons. So, hello, everybody. I'm Leanne.
And I'm Jason, and this is Let's Talk.
And as you know, this is a space where no topic is off limits. We discuss things from well-being and resilience, leadership, money, relationships, mindset, and so much more.
And always here at Let's Talk, we bring different perspectives, real life stories, and those honest conversations. Because the things that we often don't talk about end up being the things that matter the most and that need to be talked about, like today's topic.
Yeah, absolutely. So, our goal here is simple, it's to spark new ideas, to shift mindsets, and to give you practical tools that you can use in your life.
So, whether today you are tuning in for some inspiration, some growth, or just a fresh perspective, let's talk.
Let's talk.
So, welcome back to Let's Talk. We're still inside, actually, we're at the end of series 3, and we're doing two special Pride episodes this week and next week. And as you know, series 3, the title of that was The Art of Intentional Living. But today we're stepping outside our usual run for something close to both of our hearts.
Yeah, and it is because it's Pride Month, and this is the first of a two-part special that we're going to do. Today, we really are talking about identity and being okay with that. And then next episode, we're actually going to talk about community and allies and what's required in that space.
Absolutely. And this is going to be done in 2 episodes, one theme, pride, in every sense of the word and every color of the word.
Absolutely. Because Pride isn't just a parade once a year, it's a daily act of owning your story without apology. And that's what we're unpacking today. Today's episode brings together the neuroscience of identity and belonging and the cost of hiding and the science of shame. Because what authentically matters is that we show up with authenticity. And to do that, um, requires a little bit of courage in both the brain and the body. And Jason's own experience of stepping fully into who he is something that we're going to be exploring today. But I'll also share parts of my story, which is also very relevant to this conversation.
Absolutely. So, why pride is is a brain story, not just the colors of the rainbow. So let's
Although
start
I
with the
do like the rainbow, I have to say.
yes, I do too. So with that, let's start with the obvious question. Why does a neuroscience and personal development podcast want to talk about pride? Maybe some of you have already asked that question. Um, it's because every single thing we teach on this show, whether it's about identity, alignment, courage, boundaries, it all comes down to one question. Can you be fully yourself without flinching? And for me, that question isn't just theoretical. As a gay man, I've lived both sides of it, the hiding and the not hiding. And boy, did I hide for a lot of years. So this episode is personal for me, not just professional. And I think that that's something that's very, very important to talk about more than ever, even though we are in the 21st century and in 2026, we still have a lot of work to do.
Yeah. And Jason, already feel like I'm tearing up just hearing about the hiding, and that's what most people need to do for a long, long time until they can show up authentically and fully. And I'm really glad that you're bringing that into this conversation today because this isn't an outside topic for either of us. And like I said, I've got a story to share and we'll get to that a little bit later. But I'm so glad that we're having this conversation today in this Pride season for not just you, but for everybody who lives on the rainbow.
Absolutely. And so a little bit of context, right? So Pride Month actually started as a protest, and then it became a celebration. But what's interesting is that I kind of feel in many ways we are having to go back to kind of that protest mode, not just here in America, but around the world.
Yeah, we seem to be going backwards instead of forwards right now.
Absolutely. But underneath both is the same demand, that protest and that celebration. Because the right to exist as you are in public without shrinking, which, sounds a lot easier than it is sometimes, right? So today isn't just about ticking a calendar box to say that, we did, this episode and next week's episode in Pride Month during Pride season. But it's more about understanding what it actually costs a person to hide who they are in their authenticity, and what changes in the brain and the body when they finally stop. And just a little bit of a truth bomb here is that pride isn't pride in achievement, it's pride in existence. And those are two very different things to carry. I'm going to turn it over to Leanne now for, I don't know if you have anything else you want to put in there before talking about the neuroscience.
I just think, I really like that phrase. It's not pride in achievement. It's actually pride in existence. And, the depth of that is quite full on, and not just for the LGBTQAI plus community or IA plus, but also for most minority groups. Like this, and I don't want to kind of take it off on a tangent, but many, many, many of us have had to hide in some way, shape, or form. And so I love the idea of pride in existence. And that's what we're going to be talking about today. And as usual, I'm going to bring in a little bit of the neuroscience because that's my sweet spot, just to kind of go a bit deeper into this. So let's get into the brain science because this is where it gets real for all of us. The brain treats social rejection like physical pain. Physically, they can see it under fMRI machines or functional imaging machines that show that the same regions activate during social exclusion the same way as during physical injury. And this means that hiding your identity to avoid rejection, it's not actually a weakness. It's not that. It's a survival response because our brain, number one job is to keep us safe and keep us alive. So it will do whatever it can to protect us, even though we want to show up authentically.
Yeah. And when you were talking about that, how the brain treats social rejection like physical pain, I believe we talked about this in our wellness series under social well-being.
Yeah.
So it always just keeps surprising me on how almost all of our episodes in some way, shape, or form, even if it's in a minute way, always relates back to some area of well-being that we started the whole podcast on, right? as our first series.
Yeah, it's all interconnected.
It is. And so, Leanne, what you were just saying, I can totally vouch for that in a very complete way. because there were many years where I managed every detail, whether it was pronouns, who I mentioned, what I left out of a conversation strategically. It wasn't dramatic, in those moments. It it was those things that made me feel safe and made me feel like, okay, like maybe I dodged another um uh harsh comment or being made fun of in some way or whatever. So, you know, it's amazing on how through those years, when I think back, how often I had to, kind of do this throughout life because, I mean, and I have a pretty thick skin, but, not saying that those type of things didn't hurt when they happened. And so I had to strategically show up
Yeah.
on, putting those kind of safeguards in place, which actually, I think back about it, it actually was more mentally exhausting because, it was like I was working in overdrive in a lot of ways to keep myself safe. Some I think obviously that was happening subconsciously, and some that was actually happening very consciously.
And the word that comes up for me in that is a chameleon. It's almost like we're shape shifting to match the
Mm-hmm.
environment or the people that are in front of us. And that is exhausting because you have to be on and aware and hyper vigilant and alert the whole time, right? It's not just about, I can just show up and be me. It's, oh, which version of me is going to be safe in this environment? And that's exactly what the research describes, Jason, that your brain wasn't being difficult. It was actually protecting you the same way that it would from any other physical threat that might show up. Like if you saw a tiger or if somebody was coming at you in the street, like our brain's just going to move into automatic survival mode and protection mode. So concealment is exhausting because it's cognitive labor, right? To have to look through, okay, what lens can I show up as and how am I going to do that? It is really fatiguing when we have to constantly monitor for our pronouns, our partners, our photos, our conversations. It consumes this prefrontal cortex. And we know that that is, energy intensive in the brain. Although the
Mm-hmm.
prefrontal cortex is the smallest portion of the brain, it uses 80% of the resources at the best of times without having to be hyper vigilant on top of that. And that's the same part of the brain that we need in theory to focus, to make decisions, to be creative, to do our jobs. And if it's already fatigued with protection, then it's very hard to show up as your best self and to make the best decisions and do the things that we need to do, because we're already fatigued because of that protection.
Yeah, absolutely. And when looking back, like on kind of everything you were just saying, I can see actually how much energy went into, the managing, you know, I guess what comes up to mind is like managing kind of every move,
Yeah.
right? Know, um, and and not, and I think in some ways, right, it over time it just became automatic, you know, but it but probably at the time I didn't realize on how much it was actually exhausting me in different ways from an energy standpoint.
Yeah.
um and you know and what I was missing out on because I was having to do all this self-management and shaping along the way, when I actually probably, if I really sat down and thought about it, missed out on different opportunities because my energy, my cognitive load energy, was being put intentionally in a space that needed to keep me safe and me up and going and doing all the stuff, when if I didn't have to deal with that or didn't have to manage or self shape, I could have put it towards something else.
Yeah, totally. Totally. Well, that
Um,
Sorry, go on.
Oh, no, 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 no. So with that, chronic concealment keeps the nervous system in low grade or in a low grade threat state. So the body reads ongoing vigilance and outgoing danger. Over time, this contributes to anxiety, sleep disruption, and burnout. And probably if I thought about it too, right? Like I probably, or my body was probably affected with those things. I mean, if I really sat down to kind of thought of, I mean, it's been so many years now that I came out, but in the years where I wasn't out, but I knew who I was, but I had to shape shift and all this kind of stuff. I probably was more anxious than what I thought. I was, probably losing sleep and burnout in different areas of my life. Yeah. Is there anything you want to add to that, Lan?
No, well, I can see it still today for many, many people, right? Um, and I think we can honestly say here, Jason, that you were fortunate that you had a family that accepted you and and allowed you to be you, and people around you in a network. But for those that may not necessarily have even a supportive home life, that anxiety and sleep deprivation and burnout is even more extreme. Um,
Yeah.
and their nervous system is on hypervigilance, even in their home, and there's no escaping it almost. Like, at least for many, and for yourself and for my kids, they can come home and that's their safe space. But for a lot of people, not even home is safe. And I
Yeah.
think that's the reality of the conversation that we're having today, because authenticity is not a personality trait; it's a nervous system state that we need to live into in order to function at our absolute best. And even though we might have had to suppress that for a long time, it can actually be rebuilt in an environment um, that sees you for who you authentically are. And we'll talk more about that in our next session, because that community piece is so important. But I just wanted to kind of double click on that um, for some, it's not just out there, it's also in our home, where the trouble lies.
Yeah.
And then the shape shifting is consistent. It's not just in some areas, it's everywhere. And I think that can be absolutely exhausting.
Yeah. And what makes me additionally think when you were talking about that is that, like in my lifetime, being out, gosh, almost, I think it's like 27 years now. Um, but still, people that I've known that I know in my life or continue to meet, of all different, adult age ranges, like, some people didn't come out until they're like their 40s or 50s. And so, imagine, I mean, I came out in my early 20s. So, you know, um, I feel fortunate that I was able to come out early on and, live my 20s, 30s, and now 40s and almost 50, as an out gay man. But knowing some individuals who I've met along the way who lived all their 20s and 30s and some of their 40s still in hiding.
Yeah.
So, um, and then, the second layer to that too is then, also some people who not only struggle with the family part, right? But it's also the culture part too,
Yeah.
you know, and cultural expectations, which adds a whole nother layer of complexity. And I've met several, you know, individuals and friends, from different cultures that, you know, deal with, okay, I'm out, family not accepting or kind of accepting, or their family may be accepting, but their culture isn't accepting,
Yeah.
right? And and in some cultures, like, you live at home until you get married. um so there's sometimes that additional pressure, even if you have a very supportive family, right? Or my gosh, if you don't have a supportive family and the expectation is to still live at home. um so when I look back on my own story, right, like, I feel thankful in a lot of areas, right, where a I came out early, not as early as some of today's young individuals, because it's different today, right? in in ways that, like, there's a lot of people who come out when they're in high school, right? um so, not to go on this whole tangent, but it just, when you were talking about that, it made me think of the cultural piece, and you know the different age ranges when people do come out, and sometimes people have lived with this, um or or even that they're married, you know and then they're also out too, but they're married to the opposite sex. So, I mean, there's so many different, like, scenarios out there that just have so many different layers of complexity. So, with
Totally.
all that said, I do feel fortunate in different areas of my life and my story, compared to, I know, some other people's stories.
Yeah, and I've met many along the way. I've always been an advocate and an ally. Um, and I've met many, many along the way who did get married trying to do the right thing and be the right person and were miserable, and suicidal almost, and really struggling because they weren't living authentically, but trying to live by the expectation of the culture and their environment and the family expectations and the rest of it. I know many who have lived the double life, who can be out, except when they go and see their family, and then they have to kind of be the other person, right? So it's almost like this split personality thing that has to show up, and that's not healthy or useful either. I know many who haven't um, made it through because of whatever pressures have been put on them, and that breaks my heart because I don't think that anybody should have to unlife themselves because of their cultural or society. But, the pressures are so extreme and the discrimination is so extreme still in today's society. Like, it's better, but it's still there. And so, like you, I've always been an advocate, and I'm grateful that I've always been a safe place for people to land. Um, but I can't imagine what it's like when everything around you is telling you that you're not okay. And I think that's the thing, it's the shame that comes up with that, because, um, you feel okay on the inside if you could live that authenticity, but everything around you is telling you that it's not.
Yeah, yeah. And then if you want to add a whole nother layer of complexity, is like the whole religious piece, right?
Yeah.
Um, having grown up Catholic in a very small, conservative state, mostly conservative community, small, if you didn't go to church, people are like,
Yeah.
or if you missed a Sunday, well, where was,
Yeah.
you know, Jason's family, da 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 da. And this, well, maybe we were on vacation, like, and just the gossip and all that comes with that. And,
And the judgment.
absolutely. And what I find is, especially for people who have come out, right, who are kind of on the other side, right, where they're out, but it's like they still want to be connected with whatever religion they grew up, right? And many religions are not accepting and still aren't accepting. And I do see people go through a lot of internal struggle with that.
Yeah.
And feel like, oh well, I still got to go to church and I still got to do this and I still got to, and, you know, and if that works for them, awesome. Right. But I think, you know, like for me, I don't know what was worse for my family at the time. Right. Because when I first came out, my family was not, I mean, I had some aunts and uncles and cousins who were accepting, but I was not, I mean, it took some time, right, for everyone to come around and all that. But I don't know, kind of what was worse for my family, stopped going, like I stopped going to church and came out at the same time.
Double whammy.
Double whammy. And it's like, you know, um, and just some of the, you know, uh, the, like the pressure and the guilt trips and stuff like that, right? That kind of went along with that. Um, so, you know, thankfully, you know, and this is where I feel thankful, right? At that time, well, pretty much ever since high school, like I've lived after graduation, I lived away from where I grew up, right? So I had that space to really figure out my own journey, you know, and
Yeah,
figure
and
out what was on the other
come
side.
into your own, right? Like come into
Yeah.
your own without all of that influence kind of around you.
Yeah. So, you know, not saying when at the time when I went home, not saying that some of that just didn't flood back in for the few days or whatever, but you know, I mean, I see some and even if I think back, like some of my friends, right, like you know, because they grew up in a big city or you know, like they stayed and so their family was kind of, you know, right around the corner or a couple miles away, so there was much more like, well, yeah, I see my family every week, where I didn't have that, right? Like I was able to like go out, blossom, grow, you know, and kind of stand my own. So I didn't have to deal with that constant pressure every week. Um, that I know some of my friends did, like when they first came out.
Yeah.
And so, you know, which I think flows really good into, you know, what actually happens, right? When you stop the hiding, right? um and you know, and asking your question and asking yourself the question, so what's on the other side of this, right? um and I think that sometimes it can be more, you know, when you're first coming out, right, or you're freshly out, you know, versus like I've been out for 27 years. So when I ask myself that question, it's not as like, you know, like I have a whole story that I can tell, right? But what actually happens when an individual stops hiding is that their brain and life, when they come out, or let me restate that. I am a jumble of words. So the
It's a
question
big topic,
is,
right? So
it's
I
a
can
big
appreciate.
topic. So the question is, what's on the other side of this? Meaning, like when you stop hiding. And the other question is, what actually happens in someone's brain and life when they come out, or simply stop self-editing themselves along the way?
Yeah, and this is a really big question because that self-editing is, you know, as we've spoken about, Jason, it's kind of relentless in those initial stages until you're ready to come out. And the research on Identify discloses that um, it shows identity disclosure consistently shows the same patterns as you know, when we eventually come out from our, or when people eventually come out, there's that initial vulnerability, you know, that which is terrifying for them to live through. But then it's followed by a measurable drop in stress and a rise in reported well-being. So once the person feels safe enough in their environment, you know, their internal mechanism literally shifts. Their nervous system finally can become more at ease. And the shift might look like, you know, all of that energy that was spent on managing perceptions and, you know, and shape shifting and doing all of that gets returned to things like creativity. You know, They might now have the space to think about the connections that they want to build or the purpose that they're here to live into. Their nervous system moves out of that vigilance into self-regulation. And we love that regulation word. We use it every
Ew.
week. So, to be able to move out of that hypervigilance and into starting to regulate affects their whole being, not just their thoughts, but their physical state as well. The truth is that, once they start coming out authentically, relationships deepen because they can finally be built on something real, not a version of me that might be half of me that I've got to kind of project, right? So there's so many benefits when people have got that courage to come out, but they have to work through that fear first. And the one thing I've said for many years to anyone who will listen is that, people that are on the rainbow, the LGBTQ plus community, they have to risk losing everything in order to own themselves. And that is massive. Like, and I mean everything, their family, where they live, their religion, their cultural thing, absolutely everything. They have to be ready almost to risk losing it all in order to live authentically for themselves. And as a cis white privileged person, I can't even imagine what that looks like or feels like. But I have seen so many people really struggle with that because it's a massive thing, right? It's not just one thing, it's everything. And I think if you can put yourself into the shoes of somebody else, potentially who might have had to do that, we're never even going to be able to comprehend the terror that that would endure, really, to 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 face that and the courage that I just applaud in order to step past that and do it anyway. And I say applaud because many people are so terrified to look at their own shadow, let alone risk losing everything to live authentically. So your relationships deepen because all of a sudden I can show up fully. And that is a beautiful gift to everybody.
You know, as you were talking to them, Leanne, like I have felt every part of that shift in my own life. And I remember like the summer I came out, it was 1999.
Isn't there a song about that?
And I remember I came home for like a town festival, and it was like I wasn't out to my family yet, but I was, out like with school friends in college and where I was living at the time and all that. And I remember this friend back home, she was an older lady, she's deceased now, but I remember vividly that she says there was just something different about you. Like happier, more free. It was just in your existence. And so for me, that relief wasn't just, it wasn't loud or dramatic. Maybe at sometimes it was, depending on the group of people I was around, but for the most part, it wasn't that loud or dramatic. It was more quieter and more kind of subtle, but the shift was in my being and the way that I showed up, and probably, if I had to think back, probably in my body language and, how I just presented myself, right? So I was able to finally exhale after holding it in for all and breathe after holding it in for all those years without really probably realizing it, in all honesty. But it was just kind of like, okay, I can start being who I am, and not saying that there wasn't, shifts that I had to, because I still lived in a very conservative community, even though it was a bigger city, and, just workplaces back then just didn't have, the resources and the stuff like today. And I think we lost Leanne for, for a moment, but, um, but with that, it was just being able to come out was an honest way just to put it out there. And I think,
I'm so sorry. My Wi-Fi just dropped out. We've got big storms happening here in Sydney, so I'm now using my phone. So hopefully that shows up okay.
and we're back. So I was just finishing up, and and just to kind of close out what I was saying was that, like when I came out and it became easier, like it actually became easier to do the subtle shifting that I needed to do. And where it wasn't the hiding and the shifting at the same time. It was like, okay, yeah, maybe this group of people isn't going to be as accepting. So, I'll just do my little, and versus like, oh my God, I got to hide it. Are they going to notice? Da, 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 da.
Yeah.
So, even though, I still had to do some shape shifting, when I came out, it was easier.
Yeah.
If, and, and I don't know if that makes sense, but it was an easier navigation than trying to do the hiding and the shape shifting at the,
At the same time.
simultaneously.
And I think that's
Yeah.
a really important thing to say there. Thank you for your honesty and the way you've put that, Jason, because I think, for many of us, we will show up differently in different environments. Like my kids always say, oh, mum's got a phone voice, or, whatever it might be. Like we have these slight variations to our personality that we might show up differently with in different environments. But that's not because we're hiding, it's because we're matching and mirroring what's around us. And that's a completely different experience. And I heard you say before I got dropped out, that ability to be able to breathe deeply. And I think, if we can breathe deeply and if we can not hide, but still choose how flamboyant we want to be. Like even me, like I'm like an ever ready buddy, right? I'm always on the go and always doing stuff, but I've got to tone that down sometimes. So parts of our personality, we will do that naturally anyway. I mean, that's just part of being human. But having to hide is a different thing, right? Like that's depth. And I think that's exactly what this research is trying to capture in really clinical language. It says, and which is something that you've actually lived. So thank you for sharing that so authentically, because I think there are many out there that are experiencing but may not have the language or the wording to actually say what they're feeling. And I think the way you're bringing that to life gives that language to others. So thank you.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And, with all that, it's also helped to change the people or, around me. And when I say that, I mean that in a good way, right? Because the relationships that mattered in my life actually got stronger and healthier once they were built on the truth and being able to be like, hey, you know what, Jason, be who you are, you know, um, versus, I mean, when you come out, you really see who are the true friends and the true relationships in your life, because some leave.
Yeah.
And sometimes that can be family, friends, um, mentors, the whole kit and caboodle. Thankfully, I didn't have much of that personally.
Yeah. Yeah.
But those relationships mattered. They got stronger because they were based on truth and authenticity instead of the managed version of me that I was playing to fit in whatever given situation. Right.
Yeah. 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 I can totally appreciate that. Um, And, from where I sit as somebody who loves people, and literally, like I've got people in my world, in my house, that fit into this community. And I've watched that exact shift happen in my own environment. So this is real from both sides of the story. I have watched people struggle to own themselves, even though as an outsider I could see, and I've always been an advocate and I've always been a safe space. They had to be ready to make that shift and to show up authentically and to accept themselves, regardless of what the outside world says. So I think it's a very interesting conversation because our relationship is definitely much closer now, right? And even though we were tight beforehand, there's a level of depth now that is even stronger. And I think the other part of it is also that they know that regardless, I have their back, and
Mhm.
and that's so important in this world, to know that people have got you covered, regardless of what goes on. Um,
Yeah.
and we all require that, whether you're straight, whether you're on the rainbow, it doesn't matter what religion, race, creed, whatever. We need that sense of belonging and that somebody has got me. They've got my back. It's so important. And so you don't find confidence and then become yourself, unfortunately. You actually have to become yourself first. And then all the rest of it kind of flows into place. But sometimes people wait for the confidence to finally show up. And while they're hiding, that confidence isn't going to show up, right? They have to
Mhm.
kind of take that leap of faith, and then their confidence will follow. So, yeah, and I've seen it. I've seen it firsthand in my own house, as you know, and in my own family. Like there's been many times where I've just wished and prayed for them that they could accept themselves sooner, um, so they could live authentically and not waste so many years of their lives trying to shape shift and please everybody else. Because that people pleasing in order to be accepted, it's real for all of us, but even more so in the LGBT community.
Yeah. In the end, a question for you, and I'm actually surprised I've never asked you this question.
Yeah.
Um, but because I know you have kids on the rainbow.
No, I do have
Um,
rainbow children. Yeah.
yeah, and two of them who are twins, are young adults now, right? Um, and my question is did your two young adult kids who are on the rainbow, did they come out during the years of the pandemic?
No, no.
No.
Um, did they come out during the years of the pandemic? No. One came out before, quite young, and just kind of said, Mum, this is who I am. And I said to that particular child, I wouldn't care if you're pink with purple polka dots, so long as you're happy. Like, that's it. I don't care. I'm just happy that you can come out at such a young age and own who you are authentically. The other one struggled and hid and tried to live the normal life for many, many years and ended up with significant mental health issues, um, significant self-worth issues. But I couldn't force them to come out until they were ready, if that makes
Yeah.
sense. I could see it.
Mhm.
I mean, even from the age of 4 or 5, I was asked questions around gender. Why was I born in this body? I don't feel this way. There was a whole lot of stuff. So I had been waiting, right, ready to catch them when they finally did come out. However, because of society, um, they were trying to suppress that. So no, it wasn't COVID. Um, although I do know many that did at that point, because they have had that break from reality and from everybody else, and they could start living authentically. But for my kids, it was different. Um, and like I said, I've always been an advocate, so they never had a fear. And both of them have said that to me, actually, which is interesting. Both of them have said, Mum, I knew that you would accept me regardless, but I was still terrified to come out. And I thought that was interesting. So even though they knew that I was an advocate, even though they knew that there would be no issues from me in my space, there's still that terror of finally accepting who you are. And I think
Yeah.
that, and I think, it's the shame that shows up, Jason, for them, um, because society says, or religion says, or whatever says, right, that you've got to be something other than you are. And that's the real barrier here. It's not logic, and it's not even fear of consequence. Sometimes it's shame, and shame is at a deep level, um, that says that something in me is wrong. I am wrong. Like, that's basically the languaging of shame. And that something different, that we have to fear it. And fear says that, what I'm about to do is dangerous, and shame and fear are different, because fear kind of says, what I'm going to do is dangerous. Shame says what I am is dangerous.
Mhm.
Right? Or what I am is wrong. And there's
Yeah.
a big difference between the two. Like, and unfortunately, for many coming out, they carry both. They carry fear
Yeah.
and shame. And it's so sad. And again, not just in the LGBT community, many, many, many human beings on this planet walk around with shame. And it
Yeah.
is such a toxic emotion, but even more so if you live on the rainbow, because society at large says that you're not okay. Um, and even though things have come so far and come a long way, like, I was thinking, I actually watched a video today of us walking Mardi Gras this year. So we walked as part of the Mardi Gras parade. And I was watching this video, and I could see all the thousands and thousands and thousands of people on the sidelines cheering, all the walkers on, which was beautiful. And then we went around the corner to what they call the 78ers. And they were the first people that actually did Mardi Gras in Australia in 1978. That's why they call it the 78ers. And I had so much gratitude when I turned that corner and saw them, not for me, but for everybody that I love that's on the rainbow, for those that have struggled, through the shame or the fear or the whatever. So when you talked earlier about it started as a protest, um, I'm so grateful for those that stood up and had the courage to conquer that fear and navigate the shame that they would have probably been projected upon them, even if it wasn't coming
Yeah.
from themselves.
Yeah. You know, and kind of as you were talking about your kids and a little bit of their story, right, and this whole thing about shame and fear, and I mean, it made me, and as we were talking about the pandemic too, like I couldn't imagine. I mean, the pandemic was big enough, right, just in its own existence, and all the complexities that we all had to navigate, and changes in our life and all that. And also, I couldn't imagine having to navigate your story of, like, whether you just came out or you came out during the pandemic, especially in the beginning years of it, right? Where it was like basically who you lived with in your home was who you had, right? And
24/7.
seven, exactly. And you had
Good or
FaceTime and
bad, right? Good or bad.
totally. So, we're for, like somebody like me who's been out so many years, like I didn't have to navigate that part of myself during that time, right? So,
Yeah. There
you
was no
know,
escaping during that time. There was no escaping at all. Um,
no,
yeah.
yeah. So, I mean, in this area of shame and guilt, I'm not shame and guilt, shame and fear is, what you were talking about, those distinctions are very real. And the shame piece um was always quieter and harder to name than fear was, right? Because it's like you said, that the shame is who I am, and the fear is, fear of what I'm doing, right?
Yeah.
Um, and what was interesting, like for me, is oftentimes I could point out the fear, right? But it was the shame that sat underneath everything, telling me I needed to be smaller to be acceptable, you
Or
know,
the same as everybody else to be
and the same as
acceptable.
everybody else. Exactly. And,
Yeah.
you know, and, um, and it's interesting too, right? Because I think that shame and that fear, are, it's different when you're in hiding, right? And then it goes to a different level when you come out,
Yeah.
right? So not to minimize, you know, either
Experience.
area, either experience, but it's that shame and fear are one way when you're hiding, and it's a different way. I mean, it's almost kind of hard to put words when you're out,
Yeah.
but um, yeah.
Yeah. And it's interesting that you say that because, you know, it's the voices inside our head that I often talk about, the itty bitty shitty committee, right? But
Mhm.
oftentimes when it comes to shame, the voice is very rarely your own. It's inherited from all of those external sources. You know, the culture, the messaging, the upbringing, the subtle messages around what's accepted, what's allowed, what's not. So oftentimes it's not necessarily how we think about ourselves. It's our conditioned response based on all of that input coming in at us. So I think that's also worth knowing. Like oftentimes, you know, we think it's our own voice, but it's actually something that's been projected onto us by external sources, for those on the community, really. And we need to rewrite the story. And I think that's what we're hoping to have a little bit of insight or input into today. Because I want you to notice that inherited script inside your head, you know, that itty bitty shitty committee, whose voice is that? Where did it actually come from? Because I can guarantee it's probably not from your own. It's because of all the conditioning, all of society's expectations, all of the, you know, the religious paraphernalia that comes out, whatever it is, very rarely is it your own. And what we also need to do is separate identity from approval, you know? And I think that's sometimes hard because being loved by everybody was never the goal, yet it's almost the way we expect to live, that everybody should be able to accept us. And it doesn't really matter what your color, what your creed, what your religion, what your sexual orientation, your gender identity. Being, you know, we're never ever all going to be loved by everybody. And yet we kind of have this unrealistic expectation that we should be. So being real with people who matter is the key, not to
Mm.
everybody, but to people who matter. And those that don't matter, don't mind them. Um, because I think otherwise we can get caught in this rat race of trying to be liked by everybody and being so wounded when somebody doesn't accept us. Um, but even as a cis white privileged person, I'm not accepted by everybody. Do you know what I mean? Like so we've just got to like get rid of that and really just show up for those who accept us in the most authentic way. And we've got to practice saying the true thing out loud, even
Mhm.
quietly to start with, even if just to yourself at first. Because when we can start being authentic and to ourselves, then we can start kind of being authentic to the world as well. And so I think, you know, if we can start practicing these things like separating identity from approval, saying what's true out loud, and also noticing what and whose voice it is in our head and giving that up, that's going to give us the freedom to actually show up better.
Yeah. And you know, Leanne, the last one that you just talked about in so many ways made a huge difference for me because, you know, saying it to myself and acknowledging and accepting it in all honesty was such a huge shift. Um, and it's so important way before you ever say it to anybody else. Right.
And
Um,
I saw that in my kids, you know,
yeah,
that accepting it of themselves first was probably the hardest step. Once they
yeah,
moved past that, then the rest of it kind of got a bit easier, but I think that's the hardest step for many.
yeah, absolutely. Because, in all reality, like shame grows in silence,
Mhm.
you know? Um, and pride grows the moment you speak the truth internally and externally. And when you get that courage to speak the truth externally, that pride grows even if you say it to the one person that makes you feel the most safe, right?
Yeah,
Because
totally.
then
You
it
don't
gets a
have to
little, just a
broadcast
little,
it. You don't have to da, 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 straight away, right? Like small steps.
yeah, absolutely. And with that, this is exactly the kind of identity work that we walk people through inside our coaching world,
And
right?
our podcast world and our everything we do.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And if any part of this particular episode, The Pride Within, if any part of this episode is landing for you, whether it's about your identity, your personal story, or just feeling like you've been editing yourself for way too long, this is the work that we do together. Um, and check out our websites, and let's talk about what owning your individual story could look like. And you know and here soon we are going to be announcing a program that will happen in the fall that could also help you with this work too. So not quite announcing it yet, but here very soon. So, but in the meantime, head to our websites and check out, what we do, and let's talk.
Yeah. Because what I want to just add to that, Jason, is um, we are your allies.
Yeah,
You know, we are the safe space and we can help you to take that next courageous step if that's where you're at. And it would be an honor and a privilege, actually.
yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, what does this all mean practically? Living it out loud. Um, and what does owning your story without apology look like in the day to day, right? Because it's always easy to like look into the future, like, oh, in a year down the road or 6 months down the road, blah, 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 blah. But what does it actually look like on the day to day? And there's 3 shifts that I want to talk about. First, and I think probably such an important first step, is stop auditioning for acceptance
Or performing
or performing.
for acceptance.
Exactly. Because you are not put here to be palatable. You are here on this earth to be real and authentic, even with all the noise and complexities and all that's out there, because that's not going away, right? But you are here to be real and authentic. Secondly, let your story be the whole story. The parts you've hidden are not the embarrassing chapters. They are often the most important ones. Like, the beginning of every single episode, we talk, we say that we're here to have those conversations that need to be talked about. And then thirdly, find your people, not your audience. Pride is sustained in community, and I can say that, from being out a long time, is that it's sustained in community, because with that we'll go deeper, or with that said, we will actually go deeper into this particular area in our next episode. That would be next week.
Yeah, because
And
it's so important, right? The community, to have your tribe around you is really the key to showing up authentically. And I really loved that, don't the hidden parts of you and not the embarrassing chapters. Like, I think all of us have got embarrassing chapters that we try and hide as human beings, right? And even more so. And so that message is for everybody. I just want to
totally.
say, because we often will try and hide the things that we don't necessarily like about ourselves. Because pride always comes in private before we can have pride in public. So get the relationship with yourself right first. Accept yourself, quirky bits and all, the things that you like, the things that you don't like, the everything. Like, self-acceptance is really the key here. And that's one of the biggest things that I think Jason and I have been talking about since the beginning of our podcast here. Well-being, the art of intentional living, and can't think of the middle one at the second. It'll come to me.
The neuroscience of being human.
Of being human. We consistently talk about identity because for many people, showing up authentically is different and difficult, but even more so if you're on the rainbow. So get the relationship with yourself right first. That's the starting point, and it is probably the launch pad for living a life that actually feels right and feels good and that brings you joy. And that's, once that you're in that place, then the question becomes, who's standing beside you? But you've got to get that relationship right with you first. So, and like Jason said, that's exactly where we're heading in our next episode, around your allies, around your people and your tribe that supports you. So we're very much looking forward to bringing that conversation to life too, because sometimes it's not just our family, it's our chosen people that we need to kind of think about. And I look forward to bringing that to life.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And I think with that, Leanne, I think we're at the end of today's conversation and ready to do our takeaways and our resources. And
Let's do it.
let's do it. Okay. So just a little glimpse of the image from today's episode. I think this image just tells so much. And so I just wanted to put that up for a moment. And then the top 3 tips. So the first is hiding your identity is a survival response, not a personal failing. Which I think sometimes people can think of that in the opposite, but no, it's a survival response, not a personal failing, because your brain is doing exactly what it evolved to do, is to keep you safe. Secondly, authenticity is a nervous system state, not just a mindset. So it can be rebuilt through small, safe acts of truth telling. And I'd also like to put in there also self-kindness too. And then thirdly is shame versus pride. Shame says what you are is wrong. Pride says you already belong here. Only one is true.
You do already belong here. Yeah.
Exactly. And so I will change to books and top resources.
Thank you, Jason. So, as always, we have Dr. Brene Brown, Braving the Wilderness. And this book is really about belonging and what makes the case of true belonging, right? And to help you. It never requires you to change who you are, only to be who you actually are. So I think it's a great book to link that authenticity and courage and the cost of fitting in versus the benefits of belonging. So it's a great book to read if you haven't already read it, Braving the Wilderness by Dr. Brene Brown. The second one here is The Velvet Rage by Alan Downs, and it's a psychological exploration of shame and identity within the LGBT community. It's a very useful for those on the rainbow that might actually want to have a look at that book. And it goes deep into the link between concealment, shame, and self-worth, which we've talked to at length today. And then the last one here is Redefining Realness by Janet Mock. And this is a memoir about identity, authenticity, and claiming your own story on your own terms, which I really like. And it's a powerful real world example of owning a story without apology. So I think they're, again, very good books that really speak to what we've discussed today. And as usual, we've got a couple of TED Talks. Again, Brene Brown shows up here, The Power of Vulnerability. I won't go into too much detail about that because we have spoken about that one many times over the last few episodes. But then there's also Love Letter to a Stranger, The Defiant Power of a Mind at Peace by Laurie Gottlieb, I think is how you pronounce it. And it's a reflective companion piece on living without internal conflict between who you are and how you show up. And I think it's a really useful one to watch as well. So, there's always resources. We'll put the links to those TED Talks in our description on YouTube. So you can just click the link and go and see them.
Absolutely. And our second Pride special episode, which actually will be, which I cannot believe, it will be our very last episode of season 1, which I can't believe season 1 is almost here and done. And this episode, which is episode 35, is going to be on Built to be Proud, designing a life you don't have to pretend to love. And we are hopefully going to have some guests next week that will be in our conversation. And so we're excited for those individuals. Though we'll leave it to surprise of who those will be for next week. And it will be, which I cannot believe this, July 1st, next week, Wednesday already, here at 8 p.m. Pacific Standard Time in the States, and in Australia, in Sydney, Thursday, July 2nd at 1 p.m. Australian Eastern Standard Time. Anything that you'd like to say here, Leanne, since this will be our last episode of season 1?
Well, I just can't believe we're there either. I'm very much looking forward to it. And we'll do a finale completion at the end of our session next week. But I just wanted to kind of double click that the next session really is talking about community belonging and what it looks like to be inclusive. And, not just as something we say, but in practice. And I think that's the key. Because you can say one thing, you see, lots of organizations and people and leaders saying one thing, but their behaviors demonstrate something else, right? So how can we actually do this in practice, not just in words? I'm very much looking forward to our conversation next week.
Absolutely. Okay, and so I think we're ready for our closing.
Absolutely.
And before I go into the closing, I just want to leave folks with one question for the week. Is what's one part of your story you've been editing for other people's comfort? And I think that's a pretty powerful question. If you have the self-courage to dig deep on that, because we all have it, whether you're part of the rainbow, not part of the rainbow, an ally, non-ally, the whole kit and caboodle, everyone will have an answer for that question.
I think it's an interesting question, Jason, because the last two words of that for other people's comfort, right?
Mhm.
Like not necessarily even for acceptance, but we hide things for other people's comfort. Why don't we show up for our comfort? Like that's the, it's a really interesting question, I think. And I'd like to, I'm going to spend some time pondering that because, as you said, it doesn't matter where you fit in the whole scheme of life. I think we will always sometimes perform for other people's comfort.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. And, with that, um, thanks as always for joining us for today's conversation on the Pride Within, owning your story without apology.
Yeah, and as usual, we really do hope that it sparks something different, a new insight, a fresh perspective, or even just a question worth exploring or a double clicking on some self acceptance, throughout the conversation.
Exactly. And our mission here at Let's Talk is simple. And I alluded to this just kind of towards the end of our conversation is to have the conversations that matter and to remind you that you don't have to figure out this thing called life and all of its complexities and triumphs and everything in between alone. We're here to have the conversations beside you and hopefully give you some tips, tricks, nuggets to put in your toolbox to help you navigate life a little bit easier.
So, as usual, if you've enjoyed today's episode, please like it, share it with a friend, subscribe, and keep the conversation going with us.
Yes, because when we talk,
We really talk.
and anything is possible
So, let's talk
with real conversations.
and limitless possibilities. Have a really good day, everyone. Bye bye.